Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. It's an exciting time in energy, that's for sure. Thanks for joining us here at this T&D World webinar focused on Dominion Energy's Strategic Underground Program, 10 Years of Progress. This event is sponsored by Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative and Dominion Energy. My name is Rod Walton. I'm managing editor with Microgrid Knowledge and EnergyTech.com, which together with T&D World are part of Endeavor Business Media. I'll be doing the introductions and closing for today's event. And wow, Dominion Energy truly has been a leader in going underground and focusing on reducing restoration times from major outages. You'll hear all about that in just a few minutes as Dominion and PDI Squared enlighten us on how the strategic undergrounding program has performed over the past decade. Your moderator is Mike Beeler, who is national spokesperson with Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative, and he'll be joined by two Dominion grid resiliency experts, David Walker and Les Carter. Before I turn it over to our speakers, though, let me quickly share a few housekeeping items to help you participate in today's presentation in the most seamless way possible. First, if you're having any technical difficulties during today's session, and I hope you can hear me, just look for the question link on the platform there, click it, type in your problem, submit it, and our technical expert will help you out. We recommend also that you disable any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browser, as these can cause issues with the webinar player. We welcome your questions during today's event about the topic. Mike and the panel will answer as many as they can in the Q&A session that follows the main presentation, but please feel free to send those in at any time. To do so, once again, find that question icon on the rail, type in your question, hit submit, and you'll be in the queue. So just be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the T&D World website within the next 24 hours or so at tdworld.com. You'll be notified by email when that archive is available. And once it's archived, we'll also make available a PDF of today's presentation in the Event Resources tab. To refer a colleague to today's discussion, to share it on social media, or access event resources, click the icons that you see on the left side rail of your screen. And that's all I've got for now. I'm going to turn it over for the main event and our moderator, Mike Beeler. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Rod. Appreciate that. Welcome to everybody on behalf of the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative called PDI Squared. We welcome you today to listen to Dominion and their visionary program of strategic undergrounding and the progress they've made over the last 10 years. Let me just tell you briefly that the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative is a group of contractors, consultants, equipment manufacturers, cable manufacturers that advocate for underground. We want planners and engineers and even data scientists these days to look at underground as a very viable alternative for the project, to look at the total cost of ownership over the life of the asset. And if you go to the PDI Squared website, you'll notice that that's what we talk a lot about. It's like, what is the total cost of ownership over the life of the asset? So not every project's going to go underground, but we think there are many, many that can. And so certainly Dominion's got some great experience. So two gentlemen are going to join us today, Les Carter and David Walker. And Les, I'm going to ask you just to say a brief hello to our audience here before we get started. Then David will have you do the same. So Les Carter, say a brief hello to our audience.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, maybe, depending on where you are. I'm very glad to be here and very excited to share what we've done over the last decade on our strategic underground program.
And David Walker, how about you as well?
Yeah, just echo Les's comments. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about this initiative, which has been in place for a while now, but very well received from our customers and other stakeholders as part of this process. And it's nice to have, I'm newer to the grid resiliency realm based on other roles, and it's nice to have Les here, who has really been an individual in our organization who has helped spearhead a lot of things that you'll hear about today. So look forward to the dialogue.
Well, and that's what we hope it's going to be, as a dialogue. So send in your questions, and if we get some questions that are pertinent and I'm able to catch them fast enough, I'll interject them with our speakers, and we'll try to keep this conversational. But both these gentlemen from Dominion have got a lot to share, so let's get to it. So I think, Les, you said you're going to lead us off. So Les Carter, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. So here's a quick rundown of the agenda. I'm going to do a program overview, which really talks about how the program came to be, and where we are right now. David's going to come in and talk about sustainability issues in our program and some issues about innovative technology. I'll come back towards the end and talk a little bit about the metrics where we are in terms of miles converted and the results from those miles converted, and then we'll work on some questions when we get to the end of the presentation. So for those of you who are wondering about Dominion Energy, well, I hope that there aren't very many people who don't know who we are, but I just wanted to let you know that that's basically our territory right there. We have about 2.7 million customers in our distribution system. Most of them are in Virginia, but we have some service territory in North Carolina as well. We are a 345 kV distribution system, which I am not necessarily a technical expert, but I understand that's an unusual kV for distribution. We put pretty much everything that we have built new. We put it underground now, which is basically what I know a lot of other people do in terms of new subdivisions. But we still have significant overhead mileage from our legacy system. So undergrounding is not that new of a concept. This actually comes from a business. It's a staff magazine that we had 70 years ago, talking about undergrounding the wires to protect from such weather events. Dominion actually started putting wire underground in the early 60s. Which I think goes in line with a lot of other utilities in our area. So we've been doing it for a while in terms of new infrastructure, but in terms of actually conversions, not really had a very, very big program on that for a while. What happened to us in 2011 and 2012 is we had two very big storms that each of them were around about 1 million customers out, and as you can see, more than a week restoration period. We'd had other storms that were actually bigger than that, but those two storms back to back in the summer of those 2 years really started us thinking about what could we do in order to be able to reduce that restoration period down significantly. And the consensus really was undergrounding makes the most sense. I actually took the year of 2013 to actually design the program. Did that full time during 2013. Sorry. So our distribution system, we got roughly 58,000 miles of distribution lines. 40,000 of that is overhead, and about 20,000 are tap lines. Tap lines being mostly just single phase off of the main line. And there's significant outage exposure on those tap lines. And most of that comes, at least a third of that, comes from trees. And that, again, is not unusual for us. I know other organizations have that. We're allowed to trim 15 feet either side of the pole line. And as you can see from the little graphic there, we have trees that are, 80 feet plus within 15 feet of the pole line. We call it the Dominion geometry problem, but everybody knows what happens when the winds come through. So, that was something that we were trying to figure out how could we avoid that. Hey,
Les, Les, this is Mike. Can I interject a quick question?
Absolutely.
You said you took all of 2013 to develop the program. It's just kind of cool, number one, that we have you on the webinar today as one of the initial people that formulated the program. But would it take me a year if I wanted to develop something like this at my utility, would it take me a year to do, or do you think because you've kind of blazed the trail that we could do it in less than a year?
No, you could do it in less than a year. I mean, we worked with Duke in North Carolina so that they could basically take our playbook and get a program up and running much quicker than 12 months. I mean, we were in the vanguard, and so we were basically inventing the program. In fact, one of my old bosses used to say that we were building the plane as we were flying it, and we really were in the early years. But I personally have spoken with probably maybe a dozen other utilities and organizations that have expressed an interest in having a program like this, and we're very, very proud of what we've done, to the point we might be smug actually, but also we are very happy to share lessons learned, and where we can give organizations a leg up to get something done quicker than a year, we're more than happy to do that.
I think that's been Dominion's reputation throughout through my years in the industry. So good. Your information is going to be available, contact information available at the end of this webinar. Somebody might call you.
Yeah,
you never know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Hey, it's David. Just wanted to definitely agree with what Les stated along the question you asked, but I would just, if there's individuals on this call who are considering the pursuit of this program, although less than a year is probably doable, I would exercise caution, because you just think about the processes of standing up the needed resources, the design, the construction, just those things alone can take time. So when we say a year, it could take less. But if people are really thinking about going down this path, I would just encourage them not to overcommit to a date that's not achievable.
Good. Well, lay it on us. Let's hear all about it.
Okay. All right. So this program overview slide, what really I'm talking about here is a reaction that we had to our State Corporation Commission study in 2005, which followed on from probably the biggest storm we had, which was Hurricane Isabel in 2003, where we lost, I think, about 1.8 million customers of the roughly 2.5 that we had at that time. And that in 2005 dollars put the cost at $83 billion to underground everything. It wasn't just our system, it was everything in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But in 2013, we shifted from that approach. We wanted to not do all or nothing. We wanted to have a more targeted approach. And research told us that roughly 60% or more, so almost 2/3 of tap line outages occurred on about 20% of tap line mileage, which is around about 4,000 miles for us. That again shouldn't come as any surprise. Old and vulnerable infrastructure in heavily treated areas, that's the stuff that goes out. We also shifted our focus a little bit away. We do not necessarily focus on SAIDI. We focus on how we can impact the total length of restoration after a catastrophic weather event. So as I say, we're trying to move that needle from the 8-9 days down to something like maybe 5 or 6 days. So the objectives of the program was converting about 4,000 tap line miles, which is less than 3% of the cost of underground and everything. And of course that $83 billion was in 2005 dollars. I shudder to think what that number would be right now. And also to reduce the total length of restoration down between 40 and 50%. And our research showed that was something that was achievable. So
can you go back to that? Can you go back to that slide real quick, Les? There's a white paper in there somewhere, I think. But how did you know what 20% of the tap lines? You said 60% of the outages occur on 20% of the tap lines. Was it pretty easy to figure out what 20% of those tap line mileage?
Yes, it was. Yeah. We had enough data behind us to be able to go in and figure out, okay, what protective devices are going out we took a 10-year period, and we basically said, okay, how often are these protective devices, mostly fuses, but some reclosers and sectionalizers, and and of the outages that we could measure over that 10-year period, we had 20% of 4,000 miles were the repeat offenders. And so having that data behind your analysis is really important. We were fortunate in that we had pretty reliable, I wouldn't say it was 100%, but I think it was pretty darn close to being 100% accurate data. And it is proven out because the devices and the protective designs protective zones that we have converted, not going out has really changed our storm restoration process. So I think the proof is in the eating for this particular program. So I'll just move on to the next one. So again, the focus is on tap lines. So we're looking at about 4,000 miles. We had legislation passed in the 2014 General Assembly, which allowed us to convert or to have this as a rider program. At that time, we were in fixed base rates. We are no longer in fixed base rates, but we were at that time. And about 4 years later, legislation was added, which included cost thresholds within that enabling legislation. We are reviewed by the State Corporation Commission on an annual basis. We have filings on an annual basis because we do this thing in phases. Phase can be something like 300 miles of overhead removal. And the program right now is slated to run through the 2029-2030 timeframe. It's a data-driven process, and our key selection metric is events per mile. So we look at the length of the protective zone, and we look at the outage count on that protective zone. And what we're looking to do is to drive as many events off the system as we possibly can. By doing it in events per mile, then it's much more cost effective because we're not going after just the big event counts. We're going after the smaller, maybe protective zones that we can convert for less money, but still get significant numbers of outage events off the system. And, in order for us to do a program like this, which is, many hundreds of millions of dollars on an annual basis, our design, our right-of-way, and construction are all performed by contractors. Although we do have specific Dominion Energy points of contact for all projects. That was a new role that we created when we put the program in place. They're called marketing and communications coordinators, and it's their job to basically, oil the wheels of getting easements and keeping people up to date with, construction schedules, and being a point of contact, a Dominion point of contact that people can call when they have concerns or issues that they want to have resolved. So that's basically an overview of the program. I'm going to hand over to David right now. He's going to talk a little bit about the sustainability parts of our program, specifically talking about our customer interactions.
Thanks, Les. So on this slide, you can see various factors listed on the right, and I'll hit on each of these and welcome any additional questions that might come up on these topics. But to start, when you think about the customer, typically utilities, in many cases, they're reacting to a customer. The interactions are reactive, whether it be an outage, billing inquiry, or even setting up a new work request along those lines, whereas this program has essentially flipped that on its head, and we are extremely high touch. We're focused on the interaction from the inception. Les talked about the identification of potential projects. Once we have those and we start the scoping process to evaluate, there's communications that happen on the front end all the way through the back end when construction happens in the field and it is then complete. So it's really important to understand the customer's perspective, respond to inquiries. Les just noted that they have direct access to our team, which is a lot different than most customers would have. I know many utilities may have a key accounts organization where certain types of customers can do so, but when you think about the typical residential account, there's not normally a direct pathway to the utility. In this case, there is. We want that to be because we understand the importance of responding clearly, answering questions, and providing the feedback they need, because ultimately this program is voluntary. We need our easements. We have overhead facilities. Our easements are driven on that, so we need now a new easement, an underground easement, and it's not a requirement for a customer to provide that to us. So that's why it becomes extremely critical to be upfront, transparent, and really help educate the customer on what they will see and feel and understand the overall value and impact of this program. So a lot goes into that customer piece. The second you see here, legislative and regulatory, I recognize that people on this call might obviously from different states and regulatory constructs. In Virginia, the Strategic Underground Program is set up and recovered through what we call a rider, and it's not much different than traditional base rate investment. It's just the timing of what you recover and file. Now we've actually incorporated the strategic program into a larger distribution rider that includes some other investment, but generally speaking, it's just the timing is the way I would view that. And when it was originally done, it was a way to isolate and put some guardrails around what we were doing in the area of strategic undergrounding. We have very clear and defined rules through legislation on how much we can invest on a cost per mile basis. We have support from the commission. So those are things that, depending on relationships that might exist in any given state, it could really be a difference maker in a positive or potentially negative way to set this up. So I understand we can talk through that if there's questions about that, but there's fortunately in Virginia a framework that is extremely supportive of this type of investment. From a target perspective, we do the majority. We have an internal organization which is made up of program managers, project managers, technical coordinators, communications, all those things. But a lot of the work that's actually being done from a design perspective and construction, we're using third-party vendors. So we set very clear targets, whether it's monthly spend in terms of professional service or construction. We set clear mileage targets on what we would expect to come through that process and then be built on the end. And we think that's a critical point in success of the overall program. If you don't have those targets, it's hard to hold people accountable. So when you think about standing up this program, one of the most key items in my mind is process, and that's part of it, identifying those processes that would tie back to spend, to mileage, and setting that up for success. From an internal data management perspective, we have the SUMS, the Strategic Underground Management System. That's a platform that we stood up with a vendor, and it really gives us access to all things project related. Not only the work requests, but the interactions from the customer, the data that Les helps pull together in terms of the projects that we're looking at and evaluating. So it's a tremendous amount of detail and data, and it doesn't have to be a system that we have, but something similar would really be necessary for a utility, in my opinion, to be successful on this. And a topic that's probably front of mind for many is the last one is joint use. We face a situation that's probably similar to others where we have overhead facilities. We own the majority of assets that are out there. We do attach to other poles, but generally speaking, they're Dominion assets. We are now talking about converting our facilities underground, and in certain cases, there may be no attachers. So we'll go out, we'll do the work, and then we'll remove the facilities. But in other cases, you may have a cable or a telco who are attached to our poles that oftentimes do not want to go underground for various reasons. Typically, just they don't see the value in that investment. So that can result in topping the pole off. Dominion may maintain ownership. It might be converted and quit claim to go over to the telco. But the reason I point that out is a lot of details there. We have easements that support the conversion if those entities want to do that, but it's not a given and it's not a requirement. What's interesting is the aesthetics. Many customers will then ask questions. Well, I'm still looking out here at poles and facilities, whereas our focus is the improvement in restoration time and reliability. So you got to separate the two. I'll pause there, Mike, if you have any questions or
well,
questions
yeah,
online.
that slide is full of rich content. So I'm just going to make a comment on that joint use is that I think that we're going to have to look to regulators. We had a little bit of a conversation about this before we got on air today. We've got to look to the regulators to tell these telcos and these cable TV companies that they've got to go underground. They've got to get off that pole because aesthetics do matter, I believe. So anyway, if you're a regulator and you're listening, I think that ball should be in your court. But we do have a question from the audience back to talking about customers and these voluntary easements. And so you're converting overhead to underground. They may or may not have a pole in their yard, but now all of a sudden you may come to them and say, hey, I need you to put a transformer or a piece of switchgear or something like that in your front yard. And how do you approach that? And are people amenable to that? I know you have a process where you do a rendering or like a 3D rendering of it and show a virtual reality picture of what it might look like. But how does that process work? Is that fairly straightforward for you guys at Dominion?
Yeah, I wouldn't say great question. Not necessarily straightforward, and we'll talk about the technology to help those customer interactions, which is on a future slide. Generally speaking, as folks probably on this call know, when you go out and scope, I mean, there's only so many locations that you can likely put a transformer to serve, or you start putting too many devices, or you could have voltage drop and other technical type issues. So when you're laying out a development or a conversion area, you're going to likely have some specific locations which would be ideal. So then those interactions with those customers specifically become a little bit more, not challenging, but they're higher touch in nature, because to the question that was asked, yes, this sounds great at a high level. Remove the overhead facilities that won't have the experience of outages, but oh, by the way, you want to put a transformer on my property, I think now I'll pass on the opportunity. So it's definitely something we face. There are projects that fall out because of that. Our goal is when that happens, if we have, depending on where the customer is in the layout of what we're trying to convert, it could make or break a project. So we evaluate workarounds and try to work through, if it's one or two customers that could potentially be impacting a greater number, we're trying to evaluate what are the other options. And there are cases, as I mentioned, that a specific project that's qualified has to be pulled out for that reason. So it's not common. It's probably more, definitely an outlier, I would describe it, but it does happen. So we're very mindful of that. Hopefully that answered the person's question.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Let's go ahead and move on to what else you have.
Yeah, I'll go to the next slide. I talked about process, and you can see here this talks about, still references customer communications, but it's kind of laying out the stages of communication. We talk about the evaluation, design, easements, site prep, construction, and restoration. We've talked a little bit about the front end design and easement, so I'll go into the fact and just reinforce that there's communications throughout these steps as we interact with customers. The evaluation, Les talked about the 10-year outage data and how we identify projects. We hand it off to scoping and design. And then the easement process, the fact that it could, in rare cases, make or break a project. But once you get kind of to the back end construction and restoration, another very high touch item for us is people are excited. They want their facilities converted underground, but what's it going to look like once it's all done? So making sure we work very closely with our vendors. They're doing the things they should do in the field to restore properties to what they look like. One thing I'll call out is, not sure what utilities on this call are doing, but a lot of traditional installation is done through trenching. In this program, our standard practice is to drill. So we're drilling in, so you have drill pit at point A and point B, so the impact to the majority of customers is pretty limited. Not to say the hole is excavated and closed the same day, but it's more isolated to certain locations. So we view that as a positive. And if something's happened on a property, we're very mindful of being available, responding in quick order to whether it's a restoration issue or something happened, unrelated. We'll make sure we're in touch with those customers and working to address that as quickly as possible. So all that to say, it goes back to, in my mind, process and being available, which is a little bit kind of untraditional, for lack of a better word, in terms of a utilities approach. So there's a lot to unpack on this slide, and I'll once again welcome any questions. But this is probably a good one for folks to take away and just focus on. Go ahead. Sorry.
That is a great slide, and there is a lot to unpack on that. It's a really nice slide. So here's a question from the audience, a big New England IOU. They say, the buzzword of the year is artificial intelligence. Now, you just said there's a lot of customer interaction in this process that you're in. So the question is Dominion leveraging artificial intelligence to make prudent decisions on undergrounding or some form of advanced computing, or is this so customer-centric, so individual customer relationship oriented that you haven't found a place for artificial intelligence yet?
Well, one thing, I won't call it AI, but we are using, and I can jump ahead to, let me get to the slide, and I'll go backwards after this, but it is, in fact, listed as AI. It's a big data initiative. So to that question, this is a program that we are in the process of standing up, and you can see what it's called. The Merlin, we're calling it the Merlin Program, Modeling Easement Response. And really what that's doing is taking a variety of inputs that are available to us, looking at historical interactions and helping equip our front-end communications to understand what's our opportunity for success rate on acquiring an easement, to help streamline conversations, focus conversations on various topics. So yes, I guess it's a long-winded answer to say we're trying to leverage technology wherever possible, and this is a really good example of how we're doing so. We worked with our internal IT team. They're looking at customer outage history, length of service with the utility, customer bills, state census data. Do they have TV or internet? Just a variety of inputs to help drive the data that's being displayed here on this slide. And then I'll also back up along.
The end objective with Merlin is to find a better way to communicate with people when you're asking what you can put in their front yard.
That's right. Yes, because as you have those discussions, if you knew you were going out to meet with Les Carter and Les had the propensity to either sign or not sign an easement, you can kind of prepare in advance of, all right, how do I treat this conversation? So based on what we're seeing, and it's still early on, we are able to predict at a fairly high accuracy on what the success rate will be. So there's more to come for us internally. We're working through it, but we're excited about this tool. And then I just also did kind of push to a separate slide here. We talked about easements and what it looks like in a field. So we were using AR, augmented reality, to interact with customers to help them understand, and we can pull it up on the iPad when we're in the field if a marketing and comms or whoever the person is, and they can show, yes, we want an easement, and we need to put a transformer at the corner of your property, and here's what it would look like, and help them visualize that impact. Because without seeing it, some people don't know. They're used to seeing only overhead facilities, and unless you work for a utility, you're not necessarily driving around wondering, well, what's an underground transformer look like, or a switch? It's just not something that's at the forefront of your mind. So this really helps that interaction and improves the success rate for us as we pursue those easements. And the pictures are small, but you can see.
And did you do this internally, or is this the one that you brought CapTech in to help on with this augmented reality?
Les, was that CapTech that helped us? This is internal.
We built that together with CapTech, Yeah,
that's an impressive tool. And I can see how that would help, absolutely, for the people in the field. Okay. Well, that was a question. Thank you, David, for jumping ahead to that, and you can get back to where you were at.
Yeah, I'll go back to.
But that was good. Thank you.
That slide that had the content. And is there any, Mike? Do you have any questions, or is there any additional questions on, what's framed on this slide?
It's a good slide. I think we should probably continue to move forward.
Okay. Yeah. So we're looking. I'm kind of sliding through the deck now. We talked about the AR initiative that we're using, and then the Merlin program that we're in the process. It's actually been stood up, but we're just working through the final kind of stages of that. So doing some testing. So that'll be very soon. So, but as I said, we're very excited about that. So with that, I'll turn it back to Les to let him talk about some of the metrics that we've achieved and seen and continue to do.
Thanks, David. So one thing I will mention, so we talked about issues around obtaining easements. So we do have, a fair number of cancellations of projects, and most of those are to do with our inability to obtain easements. They're people's property, it's their property. We are mostly moving rear lot facilities, front lot, and that does bring difficulties and hurdles. So we're probably somewhere in between 20 and 25% of the mileage that we identify does actually not go forward for one reason or another. And as I say, it's mostly easement acquisition. There have been some situations where technicalities have really got in the way, but we're not as successful. We're not getting 100%, but that does mean that we're getting 75 to 80%. So we're doing pretty well. So these stats are as of the end of last year. We have converted 7,300 tap lines, a little under 2,500 miles converted. We're actually at about 2,640 out of the 4,000 that we've identified. That's equivalent of removing 3,600 annual events, and we've invested something like $1.5 billion in the program. Be careful taking the math and dividing 1.5 billion divided by 2,482. A lot of what's in that 1.5 is for projects that are in the process right now. On top of the 2,600 and change that we've done, we've probably got another 600 to 650 miles that are somewhere in our design, scheduling, work in progress part of the program. So all of those projects have been designed, scope designed, and easements have been obtained. So some of that investment is in the 1.5 billion. Easements obtained, 69,000 easements plus or minus over the period of time that we've been doing the program. Dominion, when we started this, was obtaining maybe about 1,000 easements a year. And typically what we would do is we would send a designer out with a clipboard on a Saturday morning to knock on doors, and that was not very successful. And that's one of the reasons why we had other people come in, people with a little bit more of the kind of like person skills to be able to kind of ease those easement negotiations. And we send out a bunch of communications. So, we're at 800,000 pieces of communication mailed since the beginning of the program. Let
me ask you a good question. I've always thought these programs were something that really contributed to goodwill for the company. It's a positive thing that you're doing for the community. You're touching the customer in ways that have not to do with necessarily their electric bill, but you're improving their property, you're improving reliability, resiliency. Does Dominion look at this as a program that promotes the goodwill of you being a corporate citizen in the communities you serve? Or is that a stretch?
No, I don't think it's a stretch at all. I think that we have a lot of support from our customers. We have a lot of support from legislators who like the program. One of the things that I hear every now and again is you really never find a customer who comes along to us and says, we don't want strategic undergrounding. Everybody really wants to have strategic undergrounding. It's only when we get into the easement acquisition that sometimes that gets derailed. But I would say pretty much most of the time it is very popular. And yeah, I not something that we could measure. Would be nice if we could, but I think there are two aspects of that. One, obviously, is the reliability aspect, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence of people will write to us and say, "Hey, you know what? The storm came through before I had strategic undergrounding. My lights would be out, my lights stayed on." So we hear quite a few of those kind of anecdotal stories, But I think also, there's just the kind of like the broader aspect of us looking at a program that says, okay, how can we take what is a very inconvenient thing for our customers to be out of power for 5, 6, 7, 8 days? How can we take that and how can we half that if it were possible? And, hopefully we can. I think people's patience with being out of power tends to wane very quickly after 2 or 3 days. And so that is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to address that issue where it's a week or more. And we, since we've started this program, we haven't had those kinds of issues, touch wood. So, we're hopefully, I think we are garnering some public relations gain from that. Yes. This is an abstract from the report that I put together every year for the State Corporation Commission, and it basically looks at the tap line reliability and performance pre and post conversion. Nothing on this should surprise anyone. It doesn't surprise me. We pick the worst performing tap lines, and so it's not unusual to see SAIDI numbers up there for the zone and the zone and downline customers. But it is a huge impact when you underground them. You basically improve everything. I think of this as more of a safety program than anything, but it actually does help KD as well. And that's kind of like a resource issue. But your SAIDI going down from 500 odd minutes to less than 2 or 3, that's huge. But that's really local benefits, which I feel like, yes, that should be expected. But this next slide here is the one that I prefer. So, we haven't had very many really big storm restoration efforts over the last couple of years, and there are multitude of reasons for that. The last one we actually had, which was really long, was in 2022, where we had a snowstorm that came over. It's like the 3rd of January, I think it was, came over. And that storm was a 5-day restoration, a little bit over a 5-day restoration, which you see there in the green bar. What I can do is, using an algorithm that we created within Dominion, I can actually look at what that storm would have been like had we have not had strategic undergrounding, and that would have been more like the 6-day restoration. And what would it look like if we actually had finished the whole of the 4,000 miles? I mean, this is obviously in the area where the storm hit. There are obviously areas where we've converted that it doesn't make any difference, but that ended up with a 27% reduction, and that was only after around about 1,800 miles or so that we had done. So I look at that and I think, okay, we could have taken a 6-day storm to a 4-day storm. That's a real impact right there. That gets people back to work. That gets people, when you're working from home, that gets you up to work again. Gets people being able to study. Gets everything back on track so much quicker. And so this is kind of like the thing that we look for is, when we have a large storm, and like I said, touch wood, we don't have one. This is the statistic. This is the analysis that I enjoy looking at, because I think it's the proof that the program actually really works. Any questions on that one?
Les, I really agree with you on that. And I think that one of the things with the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative is encouraging engineers and planners and data scientists to look at is the total cost of ownership that includes what you just said, essentially the gross domestic product or the lost revenue of outages. So what's that extra 2 days worth to you? For example, down in Florida, I've heard that if there was an outage in southern Florida and 5 million customers are out from Florida Power and Light, the value of that's $1 billion a day. So that's a tremendous amount of lost revenue or gross domestic product. So it's a great analogy.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on now, and finally, David has a few responses to the questions that were prompted in the invitation for the webinar. So I'm going to let David address those.
Thanks, Les. Yeah, you can see the questions. There's 3 that were noted, and I'm not going to read all the bullets, and I just want to call out a couple of the sub-bullets in the dialogue here. And for the first one, in terms of response from customers and other stakeholders, they all stand out, but one that I want to call out here is the bottom one: regulators recognizing the value, but also the need to monitor costs. So I mentioned it earlier, and depending on the regulatory construct that exists in any given state and the utility has, there could be nuances to how it's treated compared to what we're doing in Virginia, but that's certainly a key piece to the equation here in terms of success and deployment and an overall program that could be beneficial to customers. What we will do next, I'll note the bottom 2 bullets there: always continue to evaluate asset performance and understand the analysis that comes from that, and seek and identify opportunities. One thing we're doing at the utility here in Virginia for Dominion Energy is we have other programs that are, in my mind, a complement to what's happening with Strategic Underground. A really good example is main feeder hardening. Strategic Underground focuses on those tap lines. We have a main feeder hardening program, which is part of our G2 portfolio. That's grid transformation, and that's focused on 3-phase facilities out of substations that have on those circuits where we have enough qualifying customers based on CMI minutes, and we're making improvements there, whether it's enhancing grid architecture with additional tie capabilities or just stronger, bigger poles with different cross arms where rather than the pole breaking, we call it pole top coordination, where hopefully just the wire or the cross arm would break. But that's a complement to what you see with SUP, because you're not going to address all minutes on tap lines. So there's other things that utilities can and should be doing, and I imagine many on this call might be part of. So focused on the broader picture. And then on the last question, I mentioned it earlier in the call, is focus on process. If you're seeking to pursue this program or any program like it, have really good processes in place. We talked about a playbook, understanding what internal team members would do, external, what everyone's responsible for, and then also set and hit your targets. Because if you do that, I think that allows utilities to continue to have that support that I mentioned in the first question, the regulator support, which is ultimately a critical part of this, because as part of our business, we're seeking to recover and earn the allowed rate of return on the investment. So it all ties together. But Mike, Rob, certainly Les and I appreciate the opportunity. We're happy to take any additional questions that might be out there. But in terms of this presentation today, we thank T&D World and PDI and are happy to be here, and once again appreciate it. So I'll turn it back to you, Mike.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And I'll say that we can go into some questions from the audience here. We have a handful of questions. And one of the first questions is there a cost to the customer to get this conversion done? So when you're connecting from overhead to underground at the house, does that customer conversion cost anything?
No, there's no cost to individual customers.
Okay. Another question from the audience was...
Yeah, sorry, Mike. Just to be clear, it's all embedded in the investment made, which is recovered through the SUP rider. But Les is correct. There's not a service connection fee directly, because we've gone out and done this investment.
Yeah, and the other thing to just mention is that quite often we're going from a meter base that has a service overhead, and so we have figured out how to go around the meter base so that we come up underneath it, go around it, and then make the same connection to the meter base. So we've tried very hard to find solutions, and I think we were successful that did not incur any cost to the customer at all.
Yeah. I had another question from a public power utility out west that has a very significant underground program, and they said, what happens if you have an easement from a customer, that would allow you to put this underground, but they flat out just simply will not let you on their property. Have you encountered things like that?
That sounds somewhat, I guess that could go twofold. I don't know that in the context of this program, I don't know that they would have given us the easement because we would not have had that to begin with. But there are scenarios where, whether it's overhead or underground rights, where we encounter customers who are frustrated for various reasons, and we would handle that through the proper channels.
Yeah, generally
the
easements that we
No, go
have
ahead, Russ.
are overhead, and they don't translate to underground. Plus, we're usually moving infrastructure anyway. But I'm not sure we've ever encountered anything like that. But as David said, we would just go through the proper channels at that point in time.
And you guys mentioned that you basically are using trenchless technology to get from the street or from the tap line to the customer. And you're pretty well satisfied that, all things considered, that trenchless technology is a great way to go and adds a lot of value for both you as the owner and the customer as well?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, minimizes the impact, the ability to execute the work in the field. So we use traditional boring for the primary, depending on a secondary run, the service lateral, depending on where the transformer is. People have probably heard of it, use like a missile technology to kind of thump the service in. But all of that, you're avoiding open trenches and more impact to a customer's property. So yeah, I would definitely say that's a strong way to handle a very beneficial way to handle the program if it's an option for others if they're looking at it.
Yeah, I'm not sure we would have been able to complete the number of miles that we have if we would have been trenching. I mean, I know that I've experienced in meetings with communities where we've explained the way that we do it, and we've shown videos of how we do it, and they're kind of like the light bulb goes on. People say, "Oh, okay, that doesn't look too bad at all." So yeah, it's definitely the way to go, in my opinion.
And in the state of Virginia, we have areas that trenching is honestly not even an option.
Okay.
So another caveat to
There's
that.
a couple of questions from a couple of pretty good-sized IOUs, and they both have to do with third-party companies. The first question, they're somewhat related, so I'm going to ask them both, and you guys can respond. Do you have any third-party companies that share the cost of undergrounding? And then the other utility says, have you successfully executed any projects where the majority of the poles were owned by third parties? So comment on the role of third parties, both from a project and from a financial perspective, if you would, please.
Les, you want to take first crack at that?
Sure. Yeah. As I think I alluded to earlier on, we did work or try and work with pole attachers early on in the process to talk through the issues of joint bore. And we still actually offer that. So whenever we're doing a project, we know who the attachers are, and we give them, I think, a 45-day window to come back to us and say, yeah, we'd like to come in underground with you, and we'll make a 2-inch bore or 4-inch bore and throw another conduit in for them. But it very, very rarely happens, and that's mainly because the additional cost is just not something that they're interested in bearing. And that goes double, I think, for the cable companies as well. So we really don't have any kind of mechanism for any kind of shared cost by third parties. And what was the second one again?
Third parties where the third parties own the majority of the poles.
We have a quick claim process within the state of Virginia. I think that would probably be a rare animal too. I think we own most of the poles that we use, and so even if we were, let's just say we had a protective zone that was all on Verizon, we would just remove our facilities off of Verizon, stop paying them an attachment fee, and move on.
Mm-hmm. Right. Here's a final question. I think it's really an interesting question, and then we'll have some concluding remarks from you guys. Who pays for the initiative? The customers affected or the entire customer base? So you said you have a rider. Does that rider apply to all of the Dominion Energy customers or just the ones in whose neighborhoods you're going into?
All Virginia customers.
Yeah, it's socialized over our entire customer base. There are some customer classes that don't pay for it, but those are large industrial and commercial customers. But everybody from like churches and small businesses and all residential customers all share in the cost for it. And I would argue that they all share in the benefit too, because while there are benefits obviously to zone and downline customers directly, getting the power back on for other people is enhanced by the work that we do. So even if your line does not go underground, or if your line is already underground, you will pay for it, but also you will reap the benefits too.
Les, that's an excellent point. I was going to be a little facetious with you and tell you, well, that I'm sitting out here, I've just paid my bill and I'm eagerly awaiting to be undergrounded. But your point is very well taken, that everybody benefits it across the service territory when I have a 9-day outage go down to a 5 or 6 day outage after the next big hurricane hits or the next big ice storm hits. So well said, and that's actually an excellent point. So let's have a concluding remark from each of you. David, we'll start with you. Give us some conclusions about this whole program and the things that you've done at Dominion, and then Les, we'll go back to you and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I would just close by saying, for all the years I've been at Dominion Energy and the investments we've made as a utility, especially in the distribution business, that strategic undergrounding is, if not the most valued and well-liked program from customers, it's certainly at the top. So if there's an opportunity for utilities to consider this type of investment and they haven't done it, I would view it, personal opinion only, as something worth going down, studying, and making an assessment to determine, is it an option for their business, because it's very well received. Whereas many investments you have, whether it's in the distribution space or transmission or generation, some of those things come with a lot of pushback, and we just don't see that. We talked about there are cancellations for the issue of easements, but from an overarching program perspective, it's extremely positive. And then I'll close by just saying, I know I said it a couple of times in the discussion, really focus on process. If someone does intend to stand this program up or a similar program, making sure you have the end-to-end processes in place with the right resources, both internally and externally, the communications, all of those things that will enable success. I think those are key items.
Those are great comments, David. Thank you very much. Les Carter, you are the pioneer on this program. Give us some concluding thoughts, if you would.
It's exciting to look back and think about how things were 10 plus years ago and the journey that we've taken. I certainly am very happy with the way that the program has evolved over time. I'm also very excited to see that the interest from other organizations has grown and grown over time. I wouldn't have said that there was skepticism at the beginning, but I think a lot of utilities were looking at us and saying, oh, well, let's just see how they get on with it. Let's see if they can actually crack the code, which we have. And I think, a lot more people now are interested in, seeing it. I think a lot of regulators are seeing what's happening in Virginia and wanting to get on board too. So, yeah, I feel very happy to have been involved in this for the length of time that I have. And I also want to thank T&D and PDI Squared for the opportunity to basically share this. It's exciting to be able to talk about this to other parts of our other parts of the industry. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Les. And I'll tell you what, this is one of the most interesting programs in the country, and there are many other utilities that I actually could name very specifically that have had major outages where millions of people have been out for multiple days. And it's like, okay, I think we better get going on a strategic undergrounding program, because Dominion has proved that it can be done. It can be done successfully, and it does. It reduces these major outages where the governor is calling my CEO every day saying, when are you going to have service back to X 100,000 customers? So A very exciting program. Well done. Congratulations, Dominion. You're one of the best run utilities in America, if not the world. And thank you for sharing what you've got today with us. And on behalf of the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative, we want to say thank you, Dominion. Thank you to T&D World. And Rod Walton, we'll hand it back to you for our wrap up. Take good care, everybody.
All right. Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. And thanks to Les and David. It was a great presentation. I can just say from a personal point of view that what you guys started has really paved the way for a lot of innovation. And my neighborhood in Oklahoma is undergrounded here sometime after you guys had done your initial work. So we really benefited from you leading the way. And thank you for that. Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time, so I'm glad that you all could join us here. This live event has been recorded and will be on demand within 24 hours. And once it's archived, it will be available for about 6 months after the live event that you just heard. So please feel welcome to share it with coworkers and friends in the industry, and we appreciate it when you do that. This concludes today's presentation on Dominion Strategic Undergrounding Program, 10 Years of Progress. And thank you to our sponsors from Dominion Energy and the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative. Great job by Mike Beeler at PDI Squared, as always, and our grid resiliency expert panelists, Les Carter and David Walker with Dominion Energy. Insightful stuff today, gentlemen. And thank you to our audience for attending and for your questions. We all learn from each other, and we appreciate that. And with that, we end our presentation today. I'm Rod Walton, Managing Editor of EnergyTech.com and Microgrid Knowledge on behalf of T&D World, the industry's media voice for the electric transmission and distribution sector. Thank you again for joining us. Hope to see you on an upcoming webinar, and I hope you have a great day, everybody.